Welcome to the debate. So imagine a tiny e-commerce startup, let's say in Nigeria, providing customer service that is so fast and, well, so hyper-personalized, you would swear you were talking to Amazon's elite support team.
Right?
But you aren't. You know, it's just one person and an artificial intelligence model. And overnight, this microscopic startup has scaled its output to actually compete with global giants.
Which is a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. I mean, we are looking at a landscape where AI integration is driving like a 40% boost in digital worker output across the board. That is the equivalent of adding 300 million knowledge jobs to the global economy practically overnight.
Yeah.
But this profound technological leap forces us to confront a vital question. Does this digital transformation actually benefit all workers equally, acting as, a great equalizer? Or does it inherently skew the board, disproportionately favoring highly specialized, capital-rich entities?
I think it's the defining economic question we face right now. Because while those macro-level gains, the massive productivity boosts and the trillions added to global GDP, those are mathematically undeniable, right?
Right.
But the distribution of those benefits is severely fractured.
Well, I represent the view that AI is fundamentally democratizing. By collapsing historical barriers to complex skills, it acts as a great equalizer that empowers the global workforce from the bottom up.
And I take the opposing view. I argue that AI's productivity gains are, structurally asymmetric. They disproportionately empower massive capital owners and a tiny subset of highly specialized workers while introducing severe risks of skill atrophy and widespread displacement for everyone else.
Let's start with the sheer democratizing power of this technology, because I think the grassroots impact is being radically underestimated here. AI is actively stripping away the traditional barriers to high-level technical skills through no-code platforms.
Okay, how so?
Take tools like Tableau or Google's Vertex AI. Historically, if a mid-level business user wanted to, say, forecast demand or optimize inventory, they needed to hire a dedicated data science team.
Yeah, which takes massive budgets.
Exactly. But today, they just type a plain English question into the interface.
Sure, but they are just relying on semantic parsing to do the heavy lifting there.
Right, but let's unpack what semantic parsing actually does for the user. It acts as a universal translator. It reads the human's plain English query, understands the mathematical intent behind the words, and instantly writes the complex SQL queries needed to pull the data from the back end. Then it uses automated machine learning, AML, to run predictive models. It deploys techniques like gradient boosting, which essentially builds a series of decision trees where each new tree automatically corrects the errors of the last one until it achieves a highly accurate forecast.
Wow.
Right? The result is that a non-analyst is suddenly doing the meticulous structural work of a seasoned data scientist. That is true empowerment.
Look, a non-analyst using a predictive model is an impressive feature, certainly. But you are looking at consumer-level software features while ignoring the macroeconomic reality of who actually captures the value of this era.
But the freelancer captures the value. Look at the micro-level impact. Freelancers in the Philippines are scaling their output tenfold on platforms like Upwork.
Tenfold?
Yeah. They are utilizing generative tools like Jasper to synthesize text and Midjourney to render professional-grade imagery in seconds. They are multiplying their earning potential without needing a corporate sponsor.
Sure, a grassroots leveling effect sounds great in theory, but show me how that works when the underlying economic architecture heavily favors scale.
What do you mean?
I acknowledge that a freelancer can generate imagery faster or a Nigerian startup can deploy a chatbot. But when we look at the actual distribution of AI's massive economic gains, it is overwhelmingly asymmetric. Let's look at the Goldman Sachs projection from our material.
Okay.
Automation will handle 300 million full-time equivalents by 2025. We are turning human artisanal craft into industrialized artistry. That is not just a helpful augmentation. That is the wholesale displacement of routine knowledge work. And the entities capturing the value of that industrialization are not the freelancers on Upwork.
Wait, you don't view a freelancer tenfolding their output as capturing meaningful value?
I mean, they capture a microscopic fraction of a fraction. The real beneficiaries are the massive enterprises scaling their operations with bespoke systems. Our text notes McKinsey's projection of AI adding $13 trillion to the global GDP.
Right.
Who actually absorbs that $13 trillion? Look at Foxconn. They are slashing manufacturing defects by 50% using robotic arms guided by advanced vision AI. Or look at finance. JP Morgan Chase uses a proprietary system called Loxam.
Oh, the one that executes trades with minimal market impact?
Right. But let's explain how Loxam actually achieves that because it perfectly highlights the disparity. Loxam uses reinforcement learning. If a human trader dumps 1 million shares of a stock, the market panics and the price plummets before the trade even finishes.
Yeah, it tanks the value.
Exactly. But Loxam operates in a simulated environment, trying millions of different strategies to drip feed those shares into the market. Every time it executes a strategy that moves the price too much, it gets mathematically penalized.
Through backpropagation, right?
Yep. Through backpropagation, it adjusts the internal weights of its neural network, fine-tuning its approach over and over until it learns the absolute optimal way to trade without spooking the market. That single system saves JP Morgan hundreds of millions of dollars annually.
Okay, I see your point.
A freelancer simply does not have a bespoke reinforcement learning engine optimizing their personal wealth. Capital-rich entities do. The productivity increases, yes, but the benefits accrue almost entirely at the very top.
Well, I see the disparity you're pointing out, but I think you are misinterpreting the nature of workplace augmentation. You're framing this as a zero-sum game where enterprise gains automatically equate to worker displacement.
Because they largely do.
But when you see 300 million jobs automated, you see mass displacement. I see the automation of drudgery. AI is actively freeing human workers to focus on higher-level strategy, complex logic, and actual human connection.
Freeing them or effectively forcing them out of the pipeline entirely.
Freeing them? Let's look at software development, which is currently undergoing a massive renaissance. Tools like GitHub Copilot and Amazon Code Whisperer are actively accelerating developer tasks by 55%.
Yeah, they write the boilerplate.
And they aren't just guessing the next line of code either. They use Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG. Let's break that down. Instead of a developer hitting a wall, switching to Stack Overflow, and spending 30 minutes reading forums to copy and paste a solution,
Which we've all done.
right, we've all been there. RAG acts like an ultra-fast research librarian. It dives into a vast repository of existing code, retrieves the exact, verified snippets relevant to the specific architecture the developer is building, and synthesizes them directly into the environment.
And it uses beam search to rank the probabilities of the generated code?
Precisely. It reads ahead, evaluating multiple possible branches of code simultaneously to deliver the absolute most optimal completion. It transforms coding from a solitary grinding task into a collaborative orchestration.
Think of AI as an exoskeleton for the mind. Just as physical machinery didn't make construction workers obsolete, it allowed them to build skyscrapers instead of single-story brick houses, AI elevates the baseline of what every single worker can achieve. It handles the boilerplate, so the coder focuses entirely on the architecture.
See, that exoskeleton analogy is fundamentally flawed. Because an exoskeleton assumes the human inside is still the one building the muscle and maintaining control. But this augmentation comes with incredibly steep, hidden costs.
Like what?
The source material explicitly warns about skill atrophy and over-reliance. Think about how we navigate cities today. Most of us plug the destination into our GPS and blindly follow the blue line.
Guilty as charged.
Right? We get there efficiently. But if the battery dies, we are completely lost because we have outsourced our spatial awareness. We lost our internal map. That is exactly what AI is doing to cognitive skills.
But outsourcing rote memorization isn't necessarily a bad thing if it frees up cognitive load.
It is a bad thing when it destroys the foundation of expertise. Let's look at content creation. Procter & Gamble is now having 70% of its ad copy drafted by AI. cutting creation time from days to hours.
Which is incredible efficiency.
Yes, that is a massive efficiency gain for P&G's bottom line. But what happens to the junior copywriter? What happens to the junior developer who used to learn the fundamentals of system architecture by writing that exact boilerplate code that GitHub Copilot now autocompletes? If AI drafts 70% of the copy and writes all the foundational code, junior workers lose the fundamental training ground required to develop expertise. Your exoskeleton doesn't just support the worker, it atrophies their cognitive muscles until they cannot walk without it. Where do the senior architects of tomorrow come from if no one is allowed to be a junior today?
I will admit, the skill atrophy argument is probably the most compelling risk of this transition. When you outsource spatial awareness to a GPS, you do lose your internal map. But I don't see that as a terminal endpoint for human capability.
Why no?
Because I see it as a transition phase. The nature of jobs does not remain static. The displacement of old, routine coding or copywriting is historically and currently offset by the creation of new disciplines. The text explicitly notes the massive surge in roles like AI ethics, prompt engineering, and data labeling.
Okay, but
Let me just finish this thought. These are emerging faster than the job losses. We aren't just losing junior copywriters, we are gaining a whole new class of AI orchestration specialists who manage and refine the output.
But that assumes a fluidity in the labor market that simply does not exist. The transition is structurally hostile to the average worker. A person in Manila whose routine data entry or Tier 1 customer service tasks are entirely automated by a transformer model, they cannot seamlessly reinvent themselves as an AI ethicist in London or a prompt engineer in Silicon Valley.
Well, no, not immediately.
The new roles you mentioned require a fundamentally different, often highly academic, baseline of knowledge. It is a severe disconnect.
But that is exactly why the no-code tools I mentioned earlier are so vital. They artificially lower the barrier to entry for those exact kinds of transitions. You don't need a PhD in computer science to become a prompt engineer if the interface allows you to orchestrate models using natural language.
Let's look at how corporations actually manage this evolving skill landscape, because it contradicts the idea of an open, fluid transition. Unilever receives something like 1.8 million job applications a year.
Which is impossible for humans to review.
Exactly. A human HR department cannot process that, so they deploy AI matching algorithms. And it's vital to understand how these algorithms actually read a resume. They don't just look for keyword matches. They use vector embeddings.
Ah, translating human experience into geometry.
exactly. An embedding takes a concept, say project management or Python programming, and plots it as a coordinate in a high-dimensional mathematical space. The algorithm then takes the job description and plots its coordinates. The system calculates the distance between the applicant's coordinate and the job's coordinate.
Right, that mathematical distance is a cosine similarity score.
Yeah, it operates a lot like a modern dating app matching profiles based on a complex constellation of overlapping traits rather than a simple checklist. If the mathematical fit is tight, you get an interview.
Which completely removes the manual bottleneck. It cuts their time to hire by 50% and bypasses the initial human subjectivity.
It bypasses human subjectivity but introduces algorithmic gatekeeping. The source material points out that these systems require intense adversarial training to prevent deeply embedded systemic biases.
Because it trains on past data.
Right, the algorithm learns from historical hiring data, which means it inherently favors applicants whose resumes mathematically resemble past successful hires. So a new dynamic emerges. The system privileges those who know how to structure their digital footprint to satisfy a vector embedding.
Playing the algorithm.
It demands adversarial training just to keep it from blindly enforcing past patterns. If navigating the modern economy requires a highly specialized class of workers just to oversee and correct the machine, like the human-in-the-loop safeguards required for robotic process automation, are we genuinely benefiting the broader workforce? Or are we just constructing a new technocratic elite who understands how to game the algorithms while everyone else is subjected to them?
Now, if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, but I use AI tools every day to write emails or analyze my budget, and I don't feel subjected to a technocratic elite. And that's because you aren't. I think you are looking too narrowly at corporate hiring filters and missing the massive global leveling effect occurring at the grassroots level.
Really?
Yes, you're asking if it benefits the broader workforce. Let's look at education and finance in emerging markets, where AI is actively bypassing traditional gatekeepers entirely.
Okay, I'm waiting to see how education translates into the kind of economic leverage that counters widespread displacement.
It translates by building human capital from the ground up. In rural India and Bangladesh, AI tutors from Byju's and Khan Academy are analyzing individual student errors to customize math and science modules in real time. They're lifting test scores by 25% in severely under-resourced schools.
Which is great for learning, sure.
Predictive models forecast mastery curves by drawing from anonymized data across entirely different cultures. This creates a vastly more skilled global workforce. But the real economic translation happens through financial inclusion.
You mean microlending?
Yes. In Southeast Asia, platforms like Grab are leveraging AI for microlending to the unbanked. If you don't have a traditional FICO score, a traditional bank won't even look at you. You are completely locked out of capital.
Right.
But these AI platforms assess creditworthiness through smartphone telemetry. They look at transaction histories on the app, your geolocation patterns, even how consistently you type. By feeding that massive web of unstructured data into predictive models, they establish a highly reliable risk profile. This specific application of AI has unlocked $10 billion in loans across the region. It fuels small businesses and actively lifts millions from poverty. That is the definition of AI bypassing traditional centralized gatekeepers to distribute capital to the absolute margins of the economy.
Alternative data unlocking microloans is fantastic for the individual entrepreneur in Jakarta. I will not dispute that. But look at the sheer scale of the infrastructure required to make that edge case of global leveling possible.
What do you mean?
You are talking about ingesting real-time geolocation and telemetry data from millions of smartphones, processing it through massive neural networks, and serving instantaneous credit decisions. The underlying architecture, the large language models, the vast IoT networks, the edge computing, the massive server farms, it demands a concentration of capital that is almost unfathomable.
But the end user doesn't pay to build that infrastructure. They simply reap the benefits of the application.
They reap a consumer-level benefit, sure, but the structural economic advantage, the true leverage, stays with the mega corporation. Let me point to the supply chain examples from our text to illustrate this compounding advantage.
Okay.
When the Red Sea disruptions hit, Maersk rerouted 20% of its massive global shipping fleet and avoided $2 billion in delays. How?
By ingesting live IoT data from thousands of containers, real-time metrics on temperature, location, vibration, weather patterns, and feeding it all into Q-learning algorithms.
Which are explicitly designed to optimize complex routing in dynamic environments.
Right, but let's explain the mechanism of Q-learning to see why this is so exclusive. Q-learning explores millions of different routing options in a simulation and assigns a mathematical reward for the most efficient outcome.
Like a video game.
Yeah, it's exactly like training an entity to solve a maze by penalizing it for dead ends and rewarding it for finding the exit. Except this maze has billions of moving variables like fuel costs, port traffic, and storm fronts.
Wow. Amazon warehouses worldwide employ similar reinforcement learning for robot navigation, and as a result, they fulfill orders 25% faster. The scale of computing power required to run those simulations inherently centralizes power. A small manufacturer in Vietnam might use an AI camera to catch defects, but they cannot afford to build a physics-informed digital twin of their entire global supply chain. The gap between the top and the bottom is widening, not closing.
I have to challenge the idea that this scale of computing power is exclusively locked behind corporate walls, though. I think you are fundamentally underestimating the compounding power of democratized software layers. When a small startup in Brazil wants to optimize its inventory, it doesn't need to build a bespoke Q-learning algorithm from scratch or buy a billion-dollar server farm.
Because they rent access to an API.
Exactly. They plug into an API. They use no-code platforms to run K-means clustering on their local behavioral data to automate campaign orchestration. A decade ago, campaign orchestration of that caliber required a multi-million-dollar enterprise software suite.
That's true.
Today, they rent the computing power for fractions of a cent. Yes, Amazon has a bigger server farm,
but the baseline capability of that Brazilian startup has jumped light years forward. They don't need a digital twin of the entire global supply chain if they can use off-the-shelf AI to perfectly predict local demand and minimize their own overproduction.
But they are still playing in a sandbox wholly owned by the tech giants. Whether they use Google's Vertex AI, Microsoft's Copilot, or OpenAI's models via API, the foundational layer of this new economy is entirely centralized. We are shifting from an economy where labor held intrinsic value to an economy where capital, specifically the capital required to train and run massive neural networks, holds all the leverage. And when automation successfully handles 300 million full-time equivalents, the labor leverage effectively evaporates.
I really don't believe the labor leverage evaporates. It transforms. As the material points out, human oversight remains critical. The AI hallucinations in automation, whether it's a chatbot or an RPA bot processing invoices, require a human in the loop. It shifts work from manual drudgery toward intelligent orchestration.
And we agree on that specific mechanism, that work is shifting toward orchestration. But I maintain that the transition is perilous. If we are moving to a model where a handful of highly specialized orchestrators oversee vast fleets of automated agents, we are mathematically reducing the total number of economic participants who can command a premium wage.
Let's pull our perspectives together on this. My position remains that AI's ability to process vast amounts of unstructured data and its delivery through highly accessible no-code solutions fundamentally democratizes work.
Right.
By turning former bottlenecks like complex data analysis, software debugging, and content creation into universally accessible tools, it empowers global workers. It allows that freelancer in the Philippines or that unbanked entrepreneur in Indonesia to punch vastly above their historical weight class.
And my position remains that while those individual tools certainly exist, the macroeconomic reality is one of severe asymmetric displacement. The automation of 300 million full-time equivalents, coupled with the shift toward hyper-specialized oversight roles, represents an unequal distribution of AI's massive economic gains.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the very tools you praise carry significant risks of skill atrophy for junior workers and demand algorithmic navigation that only a technocratic elite are equipped to handle.
It is fascinating how much convergence we actually have on the underlying mechanics of this shift, though. We both clearly agree that AI is fundamentally redefining the nature of work. The era of the digital workplace being a realm of scattered files and manual data entry is just over. We are undeniably moving from manual execution toward intelligent orchestration.
The divergence is purely on who ultimately reaps the harvest of that orchestration. The technology is evolving at breakneck speed, and human oversight, whether to prevent hallucinations or adversarial manipulation, remains absolutely critical.
Absolutely.
But as AI continues to evolve from simply predicting next tokens to simulating entire global supply chains with reinforcement learning, the debate over its equitable impact is not ending. In many ways, it is only just beginning.
It really reflects the sheer complexity of managing this technological shift. It leaves us to ponder whether the rapid democratization of expertise, the ability of anyone with a smartphone to access superhuman diagnostic tools or AI tutors, will ultimately outpace the asymmetric displacement of traditional routine roles. We are handing workers an exoskeleton for the mind. But as we look at the digital landscape ahead, we have to ask ourselves, are we building these exoskeletons for everyone? Or are we just constructing a world where only a select few can afford to walk?
A question we will undoubtedly be returning to.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate.